Trans woman denied service, then buys the store and fires the staff. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The afternoon was warm, and the small-town grocery store bustled with its usual crowd. Customers moved through the aisles, some focused on their lists, others absent-mindedly picking up items as they browsed. Among them was Elena Martinez, a confident, well-dressed woman in her early 40s. She had just returned to her hometown after years away, and everything looked the same, except the way people looked at her. She had expected some stares. She was used to them, but she had hoped, just for once, to be able to do something as simple as buying groceries without feeling like she was under a microscope. As she approached the checkout counter, she placed her items on the conveyor belt and reached into her bag for her wallet. The cashier, a young man with a stiff posture and a poorly concealed sneer, eyed her up and down before glancing at his coworker beside him. Then, he cleared his throat loudly. "I'm gonna need to see some ID," he said, loud enough for others nearby to hear. Elena looked up, her brows knitting together. "For what?" The cashier folded his arms. "Store policy. We don't serve people like you." A wave of silence rippled across the checkout lanes. Nearby shoppers stopped what they were doing, pretending not to stare but clearly listening. Elena felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her voice even. "I just want to pay for my groceries." The cashier smirked. "Maybe you should try somewhere else." A few quiet snickers from the next register made her grip tighten on the strap of her bag. She glanced at the small "no refunds, no exceptions" sign beside the register and then at the store manager, who stood just a few feet away watching the entire exchange without stepping in. That's when she realized this wasn't just the cashier. This was the whole store. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let them see her break. Not here. Not now. Elena took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and calmly picked up her wallet. "You know what?" she said, her voice smooth but firm. "You're absolutely right. This store isn't for people like me." The cashier's smirk deepened as if he thought he had won. He had no idea. Elena turned on her heel and walked out, her mind racing with something far bigger than just a missed shopping trip. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Elena walked out of the grocery store, her heart pounding. She could feel the stares of the other shoppers boring into her back, the whispers filling the air like static. The humiliation burned deep, but she wouldn't let it show. Not here. Not in front of them. Once outside, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to think instead of react. She had faced discrimination before. She had grown up in this town, after all, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just the smirking cashier or the passive store manager. It was the laughter. The way they had enjoyed it. That's what made her stomach twist. She clenched her jaw and walked toward her car, her mind moving faster than her feet. She had two options. She could let this go, chalk it up to ignorance, leave it behind like she had the first time she left this town. She could do something about it. Elena had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to let some small-minded cashier make her feel like she was less. She wouldn't walk away this time. She grabbed her phone from her purse and scrolled through her contacts. There was someone who could help her. That evening, Elena sat in her hotel room, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear. "So let me get this straight," the voice on the other end said. It belonged to Jordan Patel, an old friend and successful business consultant. "You want to buy the store?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice steady. Jordan let out a short laugh. "You haven't even been back in town for a week and you're already causing trouble?" Elena smirked. Some things never change. The pause. Then Jordan sighed. "Look, buying a business isn't like buying a pair of shoes. There's a lot that goes into it. Paperwork, negotiations, permits. Are you sure you want to go through all that? For a grocery store?" Elena tapped her fingers against the desk. "It's not just about the store," she admitted. "It's about making a point." Jordan was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me everything." And so, Elena did. She told Jordan about what happened at the store, the way the cashier had looked at her like she was beneath him, how the manager had stood there and let it happen. How this town had always been like this, and how no one ever did anything about it. When she finished, Jordan let out a slow breath. "Damn," she muttered. "Alright, if you're serious about this, I'll help. But you need to be smart about it." Elena's lips curled into a smile. "I always am." The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and legal paperwork. The store wasn't a huge chain. It was locally owned, part of a small network of businesses under one main company. That worked in Elena's favor. She learned that the owner was looking to sell due to financial struggles. The grocery store had been losing money for years, barely staying afloat in a town where bigger supermarkets had started popping up. She also learned something interesting. The store's current employees had no idea. The very people who had laughed at her, who had refused to serve her, had no clue that their entire workplace was about to change hands. It was almost poetic. Elena made the deal quietly. She didn't want word getting out until everything was finalized. She wanted the element of surprise. And when the paperwork was officially signed, she wasted no time. She walked back into that store, the same one that had humiliated her. Only this time, she wasn't a customer. She was the owner. The air inside the store felt different as Elena stepped in, dressed in a sleek, professional blazer, her heels clicking against the polished floors. The same cashier was at the front register, chatting with a coworker. The same manager stood near the aisles, arms crossed, watching the customers without much interest. No one had noticed her yet. She walked straight to the register, placed her hands on the counter, and waited. The cashier barely glanced at her before saying, "Next in line." Elena smiled. "Actually, I'm here for something else." The cashier finally looked up, his smirk fading the second his eyes met hers. Recognition flashed across his face. But before he could say anything, the store manager stepped in. "Ma'am, if you're here to cause trouble, I suggest you..." Elena held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said smoothly. "I'm here to introduce myself." The manager frowned. "Introduce yourself?" Elena's smile widened. "Yes," she said. "I'm your new boss." A stunned silence fell over the store. The cashier's jaw dropped. The manager blinked, looking like he had misheard her. A few customers stopped what they were doing, their curiosity piqued. Elena took her time, letting it sink in.
Then, she pulled out a folder from her bag, placed it on the counter, and flipped it open. Inside was the finalized ownership contract. "I bought this store," she continued, her voice calm but firm, "which means I now run this place." The cashier paled. The manager took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Elena folded her arms. "And as my first order of business," she said, "I'm making some changes." A beat of silence. Then the cashier blurted out, "You can't do that." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Can't do what?" The cashier gestured wildly. "You can't just waltz in here and fire people." Elena leaned in slightly. "Why not? You didn't seem to have a problem denying me service. You didn't think I belonged here, right?" The cashier flinched. The store manager quickly stepped in, raising his hands. "Ms. Martinez, let's talk about this." "No," Elena interrupted. "You should have thought about this before you let your employees discriminate against customers." She glanced toward the rest of the staff, who were watching in stunned silence. "Anyone who was a part of what happened that day," she said, her voice carrying through the store, "is no longer welcome here. That's not how we're running this place anymore." The manager opened his mouth to argue, but Elena had already made up her mind. "You're fired," she said flatly. The cashier staggered backward. The manager stared at her. Elena let the moment stretch before adding, "You can collect your final paycheck at the end of the day." Then, she turned to the other employees. "As for the rest of you," she continued, "if you want to keep working here, you follow one simple rule. We treat every customer with respect. No exceptions." She let her words settle. Then, with a final satisfied smile, she picked up her contract, turned on her heel, and walked toward the manager's office. Her office now. And for the first time since coming back to this town, she felt completely, undeniably in control. Elena stepped into what was now her office, shutting the door behind her with a quiet but decisive click. The air inside felt stale, as if no one had taken care of the space in years. The desk was cluttered with old invoices, crumpled papers, and a half-empty coffee cup that had gone untouched for who knows how long. She took a deep breath, setting her bag down as she surveyed the space. This was her store now, not just a business, a statement. She sank into the chair behind the desk, letting the reality of it settle in. Less than a month ago, she had walked into this store as just another customer, only to be humiliated and thrown out. Now she owned it, and she had a lot of work to do. She pulled out a blank notebook and uncapped her pen, her mind already running through the list of changes that needed to happen. First, new hiring policies. No one should ever feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood store. That meant hiring staff that actually reflected the diversity of the community. Second, customer service training. What happened to her was unacceptable, and she was going to make sure it never happened to anyone else. Third, a complete rebranding. The store had a reputation, a bad one. If she wanted people to shop here, she had to give them a reason to. And last, a message, not just to the employees she had fired, but to the town itself. She wasn't here to play by their rules. She was here to change the game entirely. The first thing Elena did was call a staff meeting. She gathered the remaining employees in the break room, some of whom looked nervous, others uncertain. She could tell they didn't know what to expect. She placed her hands on the table, meeting their gazes one by one. "You've probably heard a lot of rumors about what's happening here," she began. "Let me clear some of them up." The room was silent, waiting. "I own this store now. That means things are changing. Effective immediately." A few nervous glances. "I know that some of you have been working here for years, and I respect that. But let me be very clear. Discrimination will not be tolerated here." She paused, letting her words settle. "I know some of you were uncomfortable with what happened the other day, and I know some of you didn't speak up, even when you should have." More silence. Some of the employees shifted, guilt flickering across their faces. "I'm giving all of you a chance to be part of something better," she continued. "A workplace where everyone is treated with respect, no matter who they are. If that's a problem for you, there's the door." Silence. Then, slowly, a few employees nodded. One of the younger cashiers, a girl no older than 20, raised her hand. I didn't agree with what happened," she said quietly. "But I didn't know what to do. The manager, he always made the rules." Elena nodded, her expression softening. "You have a voice," she said. "Use it." The girl swallowed, then gave a determined nod. And just like that, Elena knew not everyone in this place was beyond saving. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. The store got a complete makeover. She hired new employees, people who actually cared about the customers, who reflected the diversity of the town itself. She set up anonymous feedback boxes to ensure employees and customers alike had a say in how the store was run. And then she put up a sign, a bold, unmistakable sign right at the entrance of the store. It read, "Everyone is welcome here, no exceptions," and beneath it, in smaller text, "New management, new rules." The message was clear. This wasn't just about a store. This was about setting a new standard. And the town? They noticed. At first, people were hesitant. Some customers still avoided the store out of habit, reluctant to believe things had truly changed. Others walked in just to see if the rumors were true. But soon, something started to shift. Word spread about the changes, the new management, the better service, the welcoming atmosphere. People who had once been ignored at the registers were now greeted with warm smiles. Families that had once felt unwelcome now shopped without fear. And slowly but surely, the store became a place people actually wanted to be. It wasn't just about profit. It was about proving a point. And Elena? She had never been prouder. One afternoon, as she stood by the register, watching the customers move through the aisles, she felt a presence beside her. She turned, and there he was, the cashier, the same man who had humiliated her that day. Only now, he wasn't smirking. He looked ashamed. "I heard what you did," he muttered. "What you changed." Elena folded her arms. "And," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, he hesitated. "I was a jerk. I know that. I shouldn't have treated you like that. Elena raised an eyebrow, waiting. I guess I just wanted to say, he swallowed hard. I was wrong. For a long moment, she just looked at him. She could see it. The discomfort, the regret, the weight of what he had done. Maybe the old her would have thrown his words back in his face. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had already won. So she simply nodded. Apology accepted. The cashier blinked, surprised. Really? Elena smirked. Doesn't mean I'm giving you your job back. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, fair enough. And with that, he walked out of the store, a different man than he had been before. Elena watched him go, then turned back to her store. Her store.
And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely, undeniably at peace. Elena stood at the front of the store, watching as customers filtered in and out, going about their shopping as if it were just another day. But to her, it wasn't just another day. It was proof. Proof that she had taken control of her own narrative, proof that she had changed something that had once been broken. She turned to one of the new employees, a young man named Luis, who had been one of the first to apply when she reopened hiring. "How's everything looking today?" she asked. Luis smiled. "Busy. We've been getting a lot of new customers. And returning ones, too." That made her smile. The previous owners had left the store to rot, running it more as a personal club for a select group of people rather than a real business. But under Elena's management, it was thriving. Better stocked, better staffed, and most importantly, better run. She had turned it into a place of fairness. A place where everyone had a right to be there. She took a deep breath, reveling in the quiet satisfaction that came with it. And then she heard it. A voice. A familiar voice. Her stomach tightened. "Can I speak to the manager?" She turned, and there he was. The old store manager. The same man who had stood by that day, watching her humiliation unfold, doing nothing to stop it. The man who had lost everything the moment she took over. And now, here he was standing in front of her. For a moment, Elena just studied him. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. The arrogance was gone. The quiet confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable, gone. "Mr. Collins," she said smoothly, folding her arms. "What can I do for you?" Collins cleared his throat. "I just wanted to..." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I just wanted to see the place." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You've seen it. Is that all?" His gaze flickered to the registers, the employees working behind them, the customers chatting, laughing, shopping without worry. This was not the same store he had run. It had changed. And he knew it. I didn't expect it to be like this," he admitted. Elena tilted her head. "Like what?" His jaw tensed. "Successful." She smirked. "Well, that's what happens when you treat people with respect. They actually want to shop here." Collins exhaled through his nose. "I didn't come here to fight." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated, then finally looked her in the eye. "I need a job." For the first time in years, Elena was speechless. She had imagined this moment before. The day when he, or one of the other employees she had fired, would realize what they lost. But she had never expected him to ask for a second chance. She studied him. He wasn't desperate, but he wasn't arrogant either. He was just lost. And something inside her shifted. She had won. She had already proven her point. There was nothing else to gain from turning him away out of spite. But that didn't mean she was going to make it easy. Elena crossed her arms. "You really think I'd hire you?" Collins sighed. "I know I don't deserve it. But I need to work. And I know how to run a store." Elena tapped her fingers against her arm, considering. Did he deserve a second chance? Then she thought about Luis, about the young cashier who had hesitated to speak up but had been willing to change. About the other employees who had stepped up when given the chance. And finally, she thought about herself. How many second chances had she been given in life? More than she could count. Maybe it was time to extend one to someone else. She took a slow breath. "I'll tell you what, Collins. You can apply like everyone else. No favors, no special treatment. And if you get hired, you start at the bottom. Not as a manager, not as a supervisor, just another employee. Collins swallowed, nodding. I understand. Elena leaned in slightly. And if I hear even a whisper of disrespect toward anyone in this store, you're out. For good. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. That's fair. Elena studied him a moment longer before extending her hand. Then welcome to the new store. Collins hesitated for only a second before taking it. And just like that, the final piece of the past fell into place. The store was hers. The future was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with all of it. Elena watched Collins leave the store, her mind still processing what had just happened. Of all the outcomes she had envisioned, she never expected him to ask for a job. It would have been easy to turn him away, to remind him of how he had stood idly by as she was humiliated. But something about his demeanor, the way his shoulders sagged slightly, the way his voice lacked its usual arrogance, made her pause. People could change. She had. And maybe, just maybe, he could too. Still, she wasn't going to make it easy for him. As she walked back to the registers, she noticed Luis, her sharp-eyed cashier, watching the exchange. You good, boss? He asked, leaning casually against the counter. Elena smirked. You spying on me, Luis? He grinned. Not spying. Just curious. She sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. Yeah, I'm good. Just didn't expect that. Luis glanced toward the door where Collins had exited, then back at her. You think he's serious? About changing? Elena shrugged. I don't know. But I do know this. People deserve the chance to prove themselves. Luis nodded, considering her words. Guess that's fair. And with that, he turned back to his work, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. The next few weeks passed in a blur of progress. The store continued to thrive under Elena's leadership, attracting more customers than ever. The new staff had settled in well, creating an atmosphere of respect and inclusivity that made the place feel completely different from before. The sign at the front, "Everyone is welcome here, and no exceptions," had become more than just words. It was a promise. And then, one afternoon, Collins walked back through the doors. Only this time, he wasn't asking for favors. He was there for an interview. Elena sat across from him in her office, a notepad in front of her. She treated him like any other candidate, no special treatment. So, she said, tapping her pen against the desk. Why do you want to work here? Collins shifted slightly in his chair. Honestly, I need to work. I want to prove I can be better than I was before. Elena studied him carefully. You understand that you're starting at the bottom, right? No managerial privileges. No authority. He nodded. I get it. She leaned forward. And if I hear so much as a single complaint about how you treat someone, you're gone. I understand. Silence hung between them for a moment. Finally, Elena exhaled. You start Monday. Collins blinked. Seriously? Elena smirked. You asked for a chance. I'm giving you one. Don't waste it. For the first time, Collins smiled. Not a smirk, not an arrogant grin, a real, genuine smile. I won't, he said. And for the first time since she took over the store, Elena felt like the past had finally come full circle. Over the following months, Collins proved himself. He worked hard, showing up on time, keeping his head down, and doing his job without complaint. He wasn't the same man who had once ruled over the store with silent authority. He had been humbled. One day, Elena watched from a distance as he helped an elderly customer bag her groceries. The old Collins never would have done that. She smiled to herself. People really could change. And she had built something, not just a business, but a community. Her store, her rules. And it was better than she had ever imagined. It had been a full year since Elena had taken over the store. She hadn't expected time to move so quickly, but standing at the front of her thriving business, she felt nothing but pride. The grocery store, once a place of discrimination and exclusion, had become something entirely different, a safe haven for all. She watched as customers moved through the aisles with ease, exchanging friendly conversations with the employees, who now worked with genuine smiles instead of forced politeness. It wasn't just about selling products anymore, it was about building something real. Luis, now promoted to assistant manager, walked up to her, holding a clipboard. "We're running low on produce deliveries. Should I call the supplier?" Elena nodded. "Yeah, get them on the phone. We don't want to run out before the weekend rush." He scribbled a note before pausing. "By the way, did you hear about Collins?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "What about him?" Luis grinned. "He's training new hires now, teaching them how to treat people the right way." Elena let out a soft chuckle. The irony wasn't lost on her. Collins had once been the worst example of leadership. Now, he was setting the standard for others. People really could change. And that was the real victory. A few days later, Elena was closing up when she saw a familiar figure lingering near the entrance. A woman, one she hadn't seen in a long time. At first, she thought she was imagining things. But when the woman turned, Elena felt her stomach tighten. It was the cashier, the one who had refused to serve her all those months ago. Elena inhaled slowly, pushing aside the emotions that surfaced. She wasn't the same person she had been that day. She had built something stronger than bitterness. The woman hesitated before finally stepping inside. "I wasn't sure if you talked to me," she admitted. Elena folded her arms. "I'm listening." The woman looked nervous. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Elena studied her. She seemed genuine. There was no arrogance, no false bravado. "I treated you terribly that day," the woman continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I regret it." Elena nodded slowly. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way the past was trying to close its final chapter. "Thank you," she finally said. "I appreciate that." The woman let out a breath, as if she had been holding it in. "You really turned this place around," she added, glancing at the store. "It's different now." "That was the point," Elena said simply. The woman gave a small nod. "I should go." As she turned to leave, Elena made a decision she never thought she would. "If you ever need work," she called after her, "you can apply like anyone else." The woman stopped, visibly surprised. She looked back at Elena, emotions flickering across her face. Gratitude. Disbelief. "Really?" Elena nodded. "Everyone deserves a second chance." For the first time, the woman smiled. And as she walked out of the store, Elena realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It never had been. It was about making things right. And she had. She truly had. Elena sat in her office, staring out at the store floor through the large glass window. It was late, and most of the employees had gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew behind to restock shelves and prepare for the next day. The store was quiet now, a far cry from the bustling energy it had during the day. She exhaled slowly, thinking back to everything that had happened over the past year. The discrimination, the humiliation, the anger. Those emotions had fueled her decision to buy the store, to take control of her own story. But now, as she watched customers come and go, employees work with genuine kindness, and the community embrace what she had built, she realized something. She had won. Not just against the people who had wronged her, but against the small-mindedness that had ruled this town for so long. There was a knock at the door. She turned to see Luis standing there, clipboard in hand. "You're still here?" she asked, smirking. Luis shrugged. "I could say the same to you." She chuckled, motioning for him to come in. He sat across from her, setting the clipboard on the desk. "End of the month numbers," he said, pushing it toward her. Elena glanced down at the paper, skimming through the figures. Profits were up. Employee turnover was at an all-time low. Customers were spending more time in the store, and foot traffic had nearly doubled since she took over. It was working. All of it. She set the clipboard down and leaned back in her chair. "You ever think about what this place used to be like?" she asked. Luis let out a short laugh. "Yeah. And I still can't believe how much it's changed." Elena nodded. "Me neither." A comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Luis tilted his head. "So, what's next for you?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Luis shrugged. "You've turned this place around. You've proven your point. Is this it? Or do you have bigger plans?" Elena tapped her fingers against the desk, considering his words. She had spent so much time fixing this store that she hadn't thought much about the future. But now, looking at everything she had built, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. Not even close. She smirked. "Let's just say, I'm not done yet." Luis grinned. "Good. Because something tells me this town could use more of what you're doing." Elena glanced out at the store one last time, watching as a customer smiled at the cashier, exchanging a few friendly words. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Elena walked through the aisles of her store, taking in the sight of what she had built. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, illuminating neatly stocked shelves and employees who greeted customers with genuine warmth. This was what she had envisioned. A place where everyone felt welcome. No more whispered insults. No more silent exclusions. This was hers. As she passed by the registers, she overheard a conversation between an elderly woman and a cashier. "You know," the woman said, "I stopped shopping here years ago because of how people like me were treated. But I came back when I heard about the new owner." She looked up and met Elena's gaze, smiling warmly. "Thank you for making this a place worth coming back to." Elena felt a lump in her throat. She had fought for this. And to see it making a difference, it was more rewarding than she could have imagined. She smiled back. "Thank you for giving us a second chance." The woman patted her hand before walking out, leaving Elena standing there, soaking in the weight of her victory. She had come back to this town expecting to find ghosts of her past. Instead, she had created something new. Something lasting. Luis walked up beside her. "You're smiling," he teased. She chuckled. "It happens sometimes." Luis grinned. "You know, if you ever decide to open another store, I call dibs on being assistant manager again." Elena smirked. "I'll keep that in mind."
She wasn't sure what was next, but she knew one thing: this was just the beginning. And whatever came next, she was ready. Because this time, she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. It had been a full year since Elena had taken over the store. She hadn't expected time to move so quickly, but standing at the front of her thriving business, she felt nothing but pride. The grocery store, once a place of discrimination and exclusion, had become something entirely different, a safe haven for all. She watched as customers moved through the aisles with ease, exchanging friendly conversations with the employees, who now worked with genuine smiles instead of forced politeness. It wasn't just about selling products anymore, it was about building something real. Luis, now promoted to assistant manager, walked up to her holding a clipboard. "We're running low on produced deliveries. Should I call the supplier?" Elena nodded. "Yeah, get them on the phone. We don't want to run out before the weekend rush." He scribbled a note before pausing. "By the way, did you hear about Collins?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "What about him?" Luis grinned. "He's training new hires now, teaching them how to treat people the right way." Elena let out a soft chuckle. The irony wasn't lost on her. Collins had once been the worst example of leadership. Now he was setting the standard for others. People really could change, and that was the real victory. A few days later, Elena was closing up when she saw a familiar figure lingering near the entrance. A woman, one she hadn't seen in a long time. First, she thought she was imagining things, but when the woman turned, Elena felt her stomach tighten. It was the cashier, the one who had refused to serve her all those months ago. Elena inhaled slowly, pushing aside the emotions that surfaced. She wasn't the same person she had been that day. She had built something stronger than bitterness. The woman hesitated before finally stepping inside. "I wasn't sure if you'd talk to me," she admitted. Elena folded her arms. "I'm listening." The woman looked nervous. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Elena studied her. She seemed genuine. There was no arrogance, no false bravado. "I treated you terribly that day," the woman continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I regret it." Elena nodded slowly. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way the past was trying to close its final chapter. "Thank you," she finally said. "I appreciate that." The woman let out a breath, as if she had been holding it in. "You really turned this place around," she added, glancing at the store. "It's different now." "That was the point," Elena said simply. The woman gave a small nod. "I should go." As she turned to leave, Elena made a decision she never thought she would. If you ever need work, she called after her, you can apply like anyone else. The woman stopped, visibly surprised. She looked back at Elena, emotions flickering across her face. Gratitude, disbelief. Really? Elena nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. For the first time, the woman smiled. And as she walked out of the store, Elena realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It never had been. It was about making things right. And she had. She truly had. Elena stood at the front of the store, arms crossed, watching as the last of the evening customers exited. The automatic doors slid shut behind them, leaving a quiet stillness in the air. The shelves were neatly stocked, the registers closed out for the night, and the employees were finishing their closing duties with efficiency and ease. This had become her new normal, a business that ran smoothly, a place that welcomed everyone, and a staff that understood the value of respect. Luis approached with a satisfied grin. "Another solid day," he remarked, glancing around the store. "Sales are up again, and we're seeing more repeat customers than ever." Elena nodded. "Good. That means we're doing something right." He studied her for a moment. "You know, when you first walked into this place as the owner, I thought you were just here to make a statement. But now, you've built something bigger than that." She exhaled, her gaze sweeping over the store one last time for the night. "It started as a statement," she admitted, "but it became something else. Something better." Luis grinned. "So what now? You've taken this place and turned it into the best store in town. What's next?" Elena tapped her fingers against the counter, a thoughtful smirk playing on her lips. "I've been thinking about that." Luis raised an eyebrow. "Oh," she turned to face him. "This isn't the only store in town with a history of discrimination. There are others, places where people still get turned away, where people still feel like they don't belong." Luis's eyes widened slightly. "You're saying?" "I'm saying," Elena said, voice firm with conviction. "This isn't the last business I'm going to buy." Luis let out a slow whistle. "You're on a mission." Elena nodded. "Damn right I am." For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just fighting against something. She was building something, and she wasn't stopping here. The grocery store had been the first, but it would not be the last. She had work to do, and she was just getting started.